So we have our story of an uprising of discipleship. And the story has an interesting connection to our contemporary world. The very ancient but very well-known expression, by hook or by crook, comes from the story. Everybody know that expression, by hook or by crook? We've heard it. So it comes from this story, because it's in this story that we hear both of these symbols of discipling. The hook of the fisherman and the crook of the shepherd. The image of the hook is particularly powerful for us because it has such a visceral sense about it. We all know the experience of being hooked, right? Hooked either by joy, hooked by a big party. By last weekend, my son was married, and I was definitely hooked by a bigger thing happening. And we also get hooked in a very physical and visceral and sensory way by anger, by disappointment, by heartbreak. So it's that very, very deep kind of sense that discipling is working with us. And so we have this ancient, timeless image of the fisherman's hook, and we hear the crook later on. So as we enter this story, we're entering it as disciples, as these early disciples. Anybody else have issues with pollen these times? Yeah, so excuse me. So we have this setting of discipling going on, and one of the things that we might want to try to get clear with, even as we enter the story, is that discipling isn't what we think of today. Discipling we think of today as kind of a noun, a student, but the ancient sense of discipling is really a verb. It's people feeling the warmth of the heat of a living Christ, the warmth of the heat of love, and feeling drawn into a process of becoming that very thing. In Zen, there's a sense, a clear expression, it's just, you don't go to the master to hear the master, you go to watch him tie his shoes. So it's that sense of beingness that we're looking at when we hear this story. And we'll hear more of that, but we just get a sense of discipling is a verb of growing in beingness of the inner light of a risen Christ that is shared. So as we move into this story, already we hear Peter hooking everybody into going fishing. They go out night fishing. This is what they do. These are professional fishermen. This is how they fish. They fish at night, and in the most unlikely way, they don't catch any fish. They've done this probably 1,000 times, and they don't catch any fish. If this were a story about fishing, we'd be surprised. But it's not. It's really a story about discipling. And in the story of the gospel, the larger story of discipling, there is never a time when any fish are caught without the help of Jesus. Full stop. Never happens. And already we're invited into this place of discipling that it happens with the risen Christ. It happens because of the risen Christ. It happens because of the presence of Christ in us. So John, in writing his gospel, tells us about this need for discipling and need for the church to always be dependent and reliant and looking to Christ for its gifting, its offering to the community. So earlier in the gospel, we hear Jesus identifying himself as the vine and the disciples as the branches. Remember that story, that image? Any amens? Nodding of head? Yeah. Kathleen, all right. So the idea that John is wanting to communicate time and time again is vivid in this image of the vine and the branches. Without the vine, the branches have no aliveness. And John is saying the same thing in this story. No connection with the living Christ, no fish, no fruitfulness. So the fishermen come back after a disappointing night. Night is fading, dawn is rising, and they see out on the shore a stranger who is Jesus. And here again, we encounter the mystery of the resurrected Christ. The resurrected Christ hides in our midst, as it were, remains hidden to be revealed. So we have a sense of Jesus revealing the presence of Christ, the risen Christ, and life does that with us and in this journey. So the stranger on the shore says, "Hey guys, you don't have any fish, try the other side. Try the right side of the boat." And in some ways, unexpectedly, they do. They throw the net on the other side. And we have to love that about the disciples. They're not so set in their own prideful ways that they're willing to experience the advice of a total stranger to them. So we love that the disciples are unhooked from pride, unhooked from just their way of doing it, even though they're experienced professionals. They're unhooked from a sense of, well, I know how to do it. Nobody can tell me how to do it. So they're very liberated in their sense of life itself. A great lesson for us as we enact the uprising of discipling. And as they throw the net in the water, what happens? They immediately catch 153 fish. This is an extraordinary number, overwhelming to their net. So we kind of pause and went, why 153 fish? So scholars tell us that scientists of the day had identified 153 fish as a total number of species in the known universe. 153 species in the known universe. That was it. So this is a number of universality, the universality of this is all there is. And so it wants to kind of breathe into us the sense of the universality of the discipling process. And even more so, even more wonderfully, is the note that the net, even though it's overburdened, isn't broken. So the net, symbol of the web of life, isn't broken by death. So this universality of this gathering in, not only of these few disciples, but all humankind in all time and in all space. Make sense? Yeah? So the disciples have this huge number of fish they catch. And only one of them, we identify that one as John, only one of them recognizes in that spiritual phenomena that it's Jesus on the shore. And while it's John who recognizes spiritually Jesus, it's Peter who jumps out of the boat and splashes ashore. And this wants to be just like, wow, here's this guy jumping out of the boat and splashing ashore for about 100 yards. So this is no small things. But this is the energy of leadership that Peter is wanting to, the character of Peter conveys to us as we enact the leadership of enacting discipleship in 2024 in St. Peter's United Methodist Church in Bellevue, Washington. You hear that? It's like this, okay, we as disciples are imbued with this energy, and we can look to Peter to kind of remember that energy in ourselves. And later, just moments later, Peter is also the one who goes back at Jesus' invitation to bring some fish, and Peter pulls that net full of fish to the shore. Again, this moment of really energized leadership, the leadership of proactivity for the common good that we all want to bathe in as the people of the resurrection, as we imagine enacting discipleship, an uprising of discipleship in this very, very upset, violent world that we are in 2024. So can we feel that? This energy of rushing ashore, pulling the fish, acting and being proactive for the common good. So as everybody comes to the shore, Jesus has already lit a fire, cooking fish, and there's bread. And it's such a wonderful metaphor and symbol of how creation provides and how there is a provision in discipling that we always want to be aware of. The provision of discipling of the resources of society, but also the provision of discipling as the flame of Christ already lit and present in us. I'll say that one more time. Discipling is building on the provision of God's grace. Discipling builds and grows out of the need of society in our time, grows into that space that is filled and animated with the presence already of the resurrected Christ. But also discipling occurs in the animation of the light of Christ that is already and always present in us. We hear an amen? Amen. So that sense of the fire on the beach already lit, the food already there, reminds us of this deep, deep provisioning as we enact discipleship, as we enact an uprising of discipleship. And we might just take a moment and imagine the wonder and the awe of the early disciples. I mean, how about that? They went out for a night of fishing, and here they are, somehow gathered in the presence of the living Christ that they do not recognize, but they also recognize. In some ways, that's church. We sit in these sanctuaries. We sit in this beautiful sun-drenched sanctuary of St. Peter's. And there is a sense, maybe not clearly seen, but a sense of the living Christ being here. When two or more are gathered in my name, so too there am I. That Christ is here, maybe not physically seen, but present. We sense that. And sometimes we can, more deeply animate that sense of being alive and being present in the presence of Christ. We just take a moment and add to our experience of being here together this morning. Add to that maybe a memory of deep joy. Again, mine right now is my son was married last weekend. Got to tell you, totally out of body experience. Animated in ways that I it's like, who knew? So where's that experience in your memory? To kind of bring that forward for your experience of worship this morning. Imagining that that's the feeling that the disciples, the experience, the felt experience of the disciples being hooked into this extraordinary mystery of the living Christ. We all carry it. We all want it. We come to worship on Sundays. We participate in a congregation because it's somewhere there. Not always seen, but felt enough that we come back week after week. And for this and for you, I say amen, folks. Thank you. Thank you for doing the work. Next week, we talk about the work of worship. But here in the discipling, we want to animate that place in us that's so filled with the seen unseenness of a living Christ in us. So we have this breakfast, this meal. Another one for me is that, and I once went to I was grown living out of the house, but my mother and I had breakfast together. I can remember I grew up over in Spokane. I can remember sitting with her in this restaurant. And I could feel my mother's love, and that was such a memorable thing. At a meal. I hadn't even thought about that this week, but here with you, I remember that. That's the mystery of being together. It's so beautiful. So we have this breakfast. We're animated. We have a sense of love and being loved. And then we witness two extraordinary things. Peter is forgiven. And this forgiveness is the image of the hook or the crook in the expression by hook or by crook that lives in the process of discipling. The shepherd's hook is the shepherd's staff turned upside down with the hook to hook the lambs out of the hillside that the lambs have fallen in, right? Anybody? Yeah, that's what that hook is for. The little lamb's fallen down. Maybe the lamb has been birthed and the shepherd's too busy. He's not going to stoop over. So he's got a hook, or he's got a crook to lift up the lamb, the fallen lamb, or the injured lamb, or the new birth lamb. That is forgiveness in discipleship. It is that we witness in Peter. We remember back in Jerusalem, Peter, as Jesus was being led to crucifixion, what does Peter do? Denies him. How many times? Three times, yeah. It's an extraordinary thing. And so we find Peter hooked or crooked, lifted up and hooked by love, by the love of forgiveness. Really a wonderful scene. He is liberated by this shepherd's crook, liberated from the shame, the guilt, the sense of embarrassment, all those things that we as humans carry. And we, with Peter, are liberated from all of those. Now and always. Amen? Yeah. We are a forgiven people. We are a people of the resurrection. And the next thing we see is the transformation of Peter. Again, remembering back in Jerusalem, Peter was a braggart. Big, I'm the best disciple. Others will deny you, but what'll I do? I'll follow you forever, and I'll even die. And what does Peter do? No, he abandons Jesus, and Jesus goes on to a solitary and lonely crucifixion. So and then as Peter, here after breakfast, we hear Jesus ask Peter, "Do you love me more than these? Are you still hooked into that, comparing yourself and judging others?" And we see Peter's new identity. This identity of saying simply, "Lord, you know that I love you." Very simple. Searching his own heart, like we hear in this wonderful hymn, "Search my heart." Searching his own heart, not comparing himself to anybody else, not judging anybody else, not judging his love compared to somebody else. It's simply, "Lord, you know that I love you." That's a transformation. That's moving from the identity of a braggart to an identity of a simply present devotee or disciple. I love you. I love the Spirit of Christ. Full stop. I'm not comparing myself to anybody else because I don't know anybody else's heart. The wisdom of a transformation from braggart to a new way of being in discipleship. All of this woven into this very wonderful story, the uprising of discipleship, the encouragement for us as church in 2024 to go through the disappointments of not catching any fish. Maybe season after season, not a lot of new members. Maybe season after season of seeing people die, but remembering that the net of life is never broken. And so we remain. We remain as the people of the church. We remain as the disciples. We remain in this never-ending journey of an already and always present Christ coming forth through us individually and as community. And I know that this congregation struggles with how to do this. And you are not alone. Churches all over the country, all over the world, are facing the same dilemma. How do we enact a discipling in 2024 with one pandemic after another, with people leaving the churches in droves, with spirituality now co-opted by yoga studios in every mall? How do we be present with this very singular and yet most powerful message? We are universally a people of the resurrection, and we need to learn to behave like it. How do we share the aliveness of that? The aliveness of the wonder and awe of a meal so filled with grace and wonder. How do we do that? It's really a poignant time. But we're not alone here. You as a congregation are not alone. Not only do you have the wind of the risen Christ at your back, but you have the wisdom emerging all around the planet of discovering how church gets to be. The mystery of resurrection is such an extraordinary thing. After 2,000 years, we still don't even agree how it might have happened. And a lot of scholars and scientists say, no, it couldn't have happened. But if we step outside this story and we look at the death of winter and spring pouring in, the aliveness of spring, we get a sense of resurrection alive in plants and shrubs and trees and flowers. If we take into account that the caterpillar wraps itself in a cocoon, totally dies off, turns into mush, and then emerges as a butterfly, certainly that resurrecting power is present in the human body and the human experience and in human community. Can't be otherwise. So the story invites us to be about this work of an uprising of discipleship with a deep, deep assurance, even though we don't see it all the time, it's always present. This resurrecting power, this resurrecting force within the church, within the gathered community, within those of us sitting around a campfire, a fire, frying, cooking fish with a risen Lord. Always present with us. Always an image we carry with us. Amen? So, there is a little practice that you might want to play with this week that is a bit of an echo of this story. The practice is a practice, pretty simple, of both forgiveness and transformation. So, just for fun, may I share it with you? Thank you. We sometimes lose sight that these are really conversations, and I don't give you enough time to talk. But so here's a practice. So it's like this. I get hooked by anger. Something happens. I get hooked by resentment. Something happens that I don't like. I get hooked by disappointment because something doesn't happen that I wanted to happen. And I feel that in my body. And I can, instead of going to the story, I can simply put a hooked hand in front of my heart. And I can, with that gesture, own the feeling as mine. Anger, disappointment, resentment. It doesn't exist out there. It's felt right here in my heart and my gut. And without the story, I can still identify what it is that triggered the pulling of that hook in me, that hook into anger, into disappointment, into heartbreak, into whatever. And then as I own the feeling and identify what's going on, in some ways it's like a naming and a claiming and a naming. I can say to myself, sometimes out loud, sometimes silently, as I open my hooked hand, I forgive you and release you. I forgive you and release you from the grip of my anger. I forgive you and release you from the grip of my disappointment. And there's something about the gesture. I mean, try it right now, if you will, just as a little experiment. Just a clenched fist and then open it. And there's something about that gesture of physically, we say in coaching somatically, of a gesture. I release you from the grip of my anger. Anybody, any nods? Thank you, Shirley. Yeah, yeah. It's an interesting thing how embodied we are and how embodied our prayers can be for us. This transformation, this gesture, self-forgiveness, forgiving others, and being transformed into that place of from a hooked hand to an open gesture. So thank you for taking that in. I commend the practice to you in its own kind of randomness you might practice this week. This is a wonderful story. A wonderful way to honor this reading that the congregation is doing. We make the road by walking. And a wonderful way to stay present to this whole year-long reading and study that you as a congregation are doing. So I want to say thank you again. Thank you for being a worshiping congregation. Thank you for being a discipling congregation. Thank you for coming and showing up as community week after week, month after month, year after year. It is so important in these times, so important that there be these places of spiritual aliveness, of the spiritual legacy of a resurrected people. We can't even measure that, but it is immeasurably wonderful. So I would go on, but I'm going to stop. So let's stand, if we can, if we wish,